Hi everybody, welcome to Jay Hunto's Garage.
Look out!
There's a lot of people out there who have no clue what it looks like on the inside of an engine. So for your benefit and mine, I'm going to take apart this 2.4 liter Ecotec engine that came out of my Chevy HHR. See if I can find where I've got water getting into the oil. This has been a great running engine. It didn't have any problems up to 200,000 miles, and then that issue came in, and of course that led to some of my other videos which are of changing said engine in the HHR. Check that out, I'll put a link in the description, and let's see if we can find out. Now it's been almost a year since this issue, so it's time to get this out of my garage. And back then I took the thing apart as much as I could and poured water in a funnel straight down into the coolant passages on the sides of the cylinder, and it just ran right out of the oil pan, so that right away tells you you've got an issue there. So then, back then, I took the cylinder head off. This is the cylinder head for those of you who don't know. And I got two camshafts up here. Your timing chains go on the front. This is the front of the engine. This would be on the passenger side of the car in a front wheel drive vehicle. And I've got other pieces here I'm going to show you here in a minute. So this is pretty much what the engine looks like when it's out. It's got the valve cover on, the cylinder head still on, although nothing's bolted down. Valve cover comes off. It's got the gasket. It's an O-ring type gasket, which is good and better than cork, and it sits down into a groove, which is excellent for not having any oil leaks. Then we have our cylinder head. So there's 10 bolts that hold the cylinder head on, and you got your two camshafts up here. One's intake, one's exhaust, and you have timing gears that go on the front as well as a chain that connects everything together. Basically the water pump, the crank, and the timing gears for one chain. There's another chain that operates the balance shafts. Okay, once all the bolts are out of the cylinder head, it just lifts off. If it's stuck in any way, you don't want to pry on it with a screwdriver or anything. And go ahead and take this off. These are kind of heavy, just FYI, and even heavier if you have to take them out of the car. Show you up close what that is. Here's the cylinder head up close. Got your exhaust camshaft, which is on the exhaust side, obviously. These are your exhaust ports. And then you've got your intake camshaft as well as your rockers and your valves. This particular engine has 4 valves per cylinder, which is pretty cool. A lot of motorcycle engines are like that too. This is the front of the engine. Your water pump goes up in here. These are your balance shafts, timing chain, tensioner. This one is, I believe, for the balance shaft chain. This has a guide. Your guide tensioner. Speaking of guide tensioners, my motor that I bought rebuilt, this thing broke within 2,000 miles. So that's something to watch out for with rebuilt engines, is the timing chain that they use, because they're probably buying the cheapest they can get just to get them through the warranty period. And this is your chain for your balance shafts, which are here. All this has to be timed. This is not necessarily the correct routing for this chain. It's just laying up here. So what we've got here on the table is timing chain cover with your oil seal. This is where your belt tensioner goes, and this is the plate you got to take off to change the water pump, which is kind of a pain. These are your cam gears for variable valve timing. If they were not variable valve timing, they would just be straight gears without this piece. These are a little pricey. These also come with bolts that, if they're torque to yield bolts, so if you take these out, you're technically supposed to replace them and use a torque wrench with degree reading on it. And same with the crank bolt. Same scenario. Okay, here's another reason why you got to be careful with rebuilt engines. This came off the rebuilt engine, as well as this that I have in the car now. This is the Harmonic Balancer. Well, it's not a harmonic balancer. These engines are internally balanced, but this is the crank pulley that the belt rides on. And you're supposed to put this in this keyway. There's a corresponding keyway on the crank. This is the correct one, and you can see it goes all the way through. And this one here doesn't, which means somebody put this on without it being lined up in the keyway, and then just probably cranked it down with an impact driver. And it worked, it was okay, but the keyway, which I can show you on the crank, is right here. And it only engaged it just a little bit. Just a little bit right here. So it's almost impossible to change these out without taking all this off and everything. So there was enough of it sticking out on my engine, I can make it work. The oil pump for this engine lives in the timing cover as well, just FYI. So if you ever have to change one of these, you just got to take this off, which is not a huge deal. It's just some 10mm bolts, a couple of 13s, and changing this part out. I wouldn't be surprised if a new oil pump came with this whole piece. Wouldn't surprise me at all. Alright, so now I'm going to turn this guy upside down and start taking it apart. Okay, I've got the engine flipped upside down. Now let's see what some bearings look like after 200,000 miles and changing the engine oil only when the counter got to 20 or 15%, which is in some cases was 10,000 miles on this 06 Chevy HHR. Okay, the bolts for the oil pan on this particular engine are all 13mm. Okay, all the bolts out. I'm going to take the oil pan off now. There we go. This is what the underside of the engine looks like, the business end. This is the oil pan. This is a windage tray. That's actually a good thing to keep oil from foaming up due to the rotation of the crankshaft. So at first glance, I don't see anything that would cause an oil leak. So what I'm going to do is take these bolts out of here and take all the bolts out, see where that gets us, and we'll take a look at the rod bearings. If we can get to the crank bearings, which we should be able to, I'll take a look at those too and see what we got. Okay, these bolts here are all 15mm. There's also some 13mm down in between the webbing. So, and these are torqued on there pretty darn good, so keep that in mind. These aren't going to come off easy. Okay, now that all that noise is done, all of the bolts are out, and I don't know if you can see it or not, but this case has a split right here, even with sealant. So I'm assuming I just got all the bolts out that'll separate the bottom half from the top half, so we can see what the heck's going on in here. Also keep in mind, this oil pan, no gasket, just sealant. That's pretty much how they're doing things these days. But this is 2018. This went from 06 to 2017. So 11 years that sealant lasted. I didn't have any leaks on this at all. Not even in the rear main. It still looks all excuse me. Still looks all nice and dry back here. So let's see if we can get this apart the garage way, not necessarily the correct way for a rebuild. Alright, there's a gap over here on this side. This would be the back of the engine where it sits against a firewall. There's a gap there. You can get a screwdriver in front and back, and that will allow this to separate. So let's see what we got. If it will separate. There we go. Okay, there's our crankshaft. This is actually the housing for the cam bearings, which, to my amazement, look awesome. Alright, this is just the way I pulled them off. You can see a little bit of milkshake oil in here, which is indicative of water getting into the oil, coolant getting in, which is to be expected. Alright, let me show you this. Okay, this is your crank journals. This is after 200,000 miles of conventional oil. I put synthetic oil in this car one time and it started leaking. So I drained it out, put conventional oil back in, and it was fine ever since. No leaks whatsoever. Here's your rear main. No problems at all. Way to go. Yeah, this did not leak a bit. And here is the actual bearings. These look fine. Here's the chocolate milk color I was talking about. Milkshake. They've got some wear, you can tell, but they're wearing evenly, and there is no big gouges, no indication of an impending bearing that spins. Nothing. These look nice, actually. You know, after 200,000 miles, they're going to have some scratches in them just from normal wear. Yeah, these actually look very good. That crank could just use a little polish and go right back into another car. And that's why you would polish it, just for these little scratches here. Boy, those look nice. But still, I don't see any sort of crack. That's what I'm going to be looking for now. A crack that will show us where oil was getting into the water, unless it was in this seal here. Maybe that seal let go. Take a look at this. Let me get a better light for you down there. Alright, take a look at that. That is an oil squirter. Basically, that little tube down there that shoots oil at the bottom of the piston to keep the piston cool. Pretty good. These Ecotec engines were pretty good. They had their weak points like the timing chain, but that wasn't really the engine. That was just a bad part from a supplier. Okay, now we're going to take off the rod bearing caps. That's these bad boys here, and see what those bearings look like. Here's something weird for you. Everything on this engine is metric. Rod bolts are 7/16. That's so weird. We're going to start right here. These bad boys are on there. 1/2-inch dry breaker bar. Gets those off the easiest. On a side note, see how these crank throws are knife edged? That's pretty slick. When you take these off, you want to keep them with the corresponding connecting rod. There's your bearing. That's a pretty bearing right there. Piston's out. Here's something really weird. This is a connecting rod and piston I just took out. Little tiny thing. Look at this, where they come together. That looks like a crack on both sides. Normally these are machined. They even have rough surfaces on both sides, like it's been broken away. That's weird. Bearings look good though. This one has just a little nick in it from me pushing the piston out with a screwdriver. Otherwise, these look nice. Here's another look at that connecting rod. That looks cracked. That's so weird. I've never seen connecting rods like that. Not that I rebuild motors all the time, but that looks weird to me. But it did fine for 200,000 miles. Here's our bearing. See, it sits right in that little keyway. See that? This bearing looks good as well. It's nice. Nice looking bearing. I would never do this on an engine I was going to reuse. Connecting rod looks really rusty for some reason. Pistons, piston rings, full floating pistons. That's pretty slick too. They got a C-clip in there to hold them in. Pistons look nice. The skirts are good. No cracks. Other than me banging on it with the breaker bar, it looks fine. But that shows you how soft these are. You know, I'm not really hammering on it, I'm just tapping it down. and it's still dinging it. So bearings did its job, and so did the oil. Very good. I didn't buy any particular brand of oil. I just bought oil. Conventional. This one's the same way. It's got the cracks. It looks like it literally looks like these have been broken apart, which is weird. So if you've got one of these engines, Ecotec 2.2 or 2.4, this is what it looks like inside. Somebody's dogs are literally barking. Another good bearing. No issues. This bearing's fine too. Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to say that all the bearings are good on this. We're good. Points off for weirdness on the connecting rods. That is so weird. I haven't been out of engine building or rebuilding that long to not think that that was weird. We'll be able to take the crank out and have a good look at that, as well as the bearings in the upper half of the case. These bearings are good too. Okay, these bearings, outstanding. Outstanding. A few dings from me banging on it, but that's it. If anybody needs any of these parts, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to drop them off at Mario's shop. They have a guy that comes and gets stuff like this. If this is, if you're seeing this video and it's past January 2018, I don't have any of these parts left because I would have already taken them over there and dropped them off. Alright, so all that's out now. Here's your tone ring for your crank position sensor. That's what this guy is. This thing should lift out of here. Okay, and again, the rear main seal, it was not leaking. Still, and you know what? This tells me you can probably replace this thing on the car, because it goes in and out of there fairly easily. Maybe. If you're going to go through all that trouble, you better think about it. Okay, that is a heavy sucker. Crank is out. You can see the milkshake colored oil. Like there's some on the journals here. Hard to tell on camera, but we already know that. So all the bearings here look outstanding. These are your the crank bearings. 200,000 miles. These look nice. I'm sure there's wear, but it sure doesn't look like there's much of any. Your thrust bearing. It's got this extra meat front and back to take the crank moving backwards and forwards, which it does a little bit. And this is a 3-piece. This is weird. These pieces, you can tell, sit in offsets. Your little nooks, and they move. Never seen one like that. Probably common these days. So anyway, we've got it apart, totally stripped. The block is totally disassembled. The only thing left is the balance shafts and these oil squirters, and shoot the piston walls cylinder walls here. Oh, I'm getting oil everywhere. Cylinder walls here look outstanding. What you're looking for here is a ridge at the top, and there is none at all. So what I was doing before I took all this apart was pouring water into the water jackets here, and it would just run straight out. So I'm going to see if I can find where that goes on the other side and see what's supposed to stop that. And I cannot tell where that goes on the other side. Looks like it just goes into the block webbing, which means we would see a crack in said block webbing somewhere. Check this out. What does this remind you of down here? Styrofoam coolers. That's so weird. And I'm used to building old engines for Mustangs and whatnot, 289, 302, 351 Windsor. I've never seen that in any of those vintage blocks. Modern technology. Cars are weird. So I'm going to poke around here and see if I can find. And here's your balance shaft. There's one here and there's one on the other side. You got to have that if you have a 4-cylinder over 2 liters, or else it vibrates all the heck. And here's the cylinder walls, looking good. See this? Hecho in Mexico means it was made in Mexico. This engine did quite well. 200,000 miles. So basically what I've learned from this teardown is conventional oil does just fine. I wouldn't recommend changing it at the intervals I changed it at, but 5,000 miles I think you'd be safe. And the bearings on this thing looked great. I still never found where the oil leak was coming from. Don't know if I ever will. And I'm sorry, that would be the coolant leak that is getting into the oil. Never did discover definitively where that was taking place. And also the when you buy a rebuilt engine, what to look out for. Like we saw the crank pulley that was misaligned, improperly installed, and the timing chain that had a broken guide that I had to replace on the engine that's in the car now. This engine, as a matter of fact, this 2006 engine with 200,000 miles on it, I had the guide here, I took it off this engine, put it in the car, and that was like 3,000 miles ago, and it's still going fine. That's pretty good. So the takeaway is be very leery of rebuilt engines, and especially if you don't know who's rebuilding it, and because the warranties on those are crap, trust me. And change your oil and it should take care of you. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.